In this episode, we'll attempt to go further down the road into the world of song lyrics with a lyricist who, it's fair to say, has influenced generations of readers and listeners. Today, I want to know more about riff, hook and line. How does it work? What makes a good one? And what actually went down from a lyrical perspective in the 1960s. So off we go, snatching at the thin air of this vast and shifting universe of lyrics that drift in our heads and help us make sense of this crazy world. You used to ride on the chrome horse with your diplomat who carried on his shoulder a Siamese cat. Ain't it hard when you discover that he really wasn't where it's at after he took from you everything he could steal? Tell me, how does it feel? Here's Bob Dylan for you to kick things off like a rolling stone. Like a Rolling Stone, with lyrics by Bob Dylan. Originally, the lyric sheet was 20 pages long, with Bob saying, "I'd never thought of it as being a song until one day I was at the piano, and on the paper it was singing, 'How does it feel?'" The most stunning thing about Like a Rolling Stone is how unprecedented it was, the voltage of Dylan's language and the accusation in his delivery. And remember, he was 24 at the time. But it's that hook of the chorus line that interests me in the way those four words, "how does it feel?" can encapsulate the whole song. How does a songwriter do that? To find out, we'll chat next with the man who wrote the lyrics for this song, Squeeze, Up the Junction. Squeeze from 1979 with Up the Junction. Lyrics by our first guest today, Chris Difford. And is it true that you wrote those lyrics in New Orleans, and what can you remember of writing those words?
Well, I was homesick. I was clearly begging to be at home because we'd been on tour for what seemed like months, which it probably was. In those early days of Squeeze going on tour in America, it never seemed to cease, just constantly sitting in the van going from one gig to the next, which was great fun. But I remember sitting in, I think it was the Rip Van Winkle Motel on the edges of New Orleans.
Great name.
It is great. And I was bored and I just thought, well, I'll write a song. So I wrote that lyric. And from a lyrical point of view, most of the best lyrics that I've written in my career have all come to me without me thinking about them. I kind of sit there, I open up my spirit, and they just appear. It's kind of a magical thing. The ones that I have to sort of work out sometimes don't come across very, very well. But songs like Up the Junction, and there's a wonderful song that Glenn and I have written called Some Fantastic Place, which is about a relationship between Glenn and his girlfriend. She sadly died. And she was the person that brought Glenn and I together. And, you know, it was an amazingly emotional time to sit down and just let the pen do the talking.
It sounds like you're triggering the emotional side of yourself to come out, and so if you say there's the sort of emotional trigger to open yourself up to become a conduit for lyrics, let's say, do you then bring in the editorial self?
Well, I think there's a little boy who lives in my imagination, and he's the writer, and I have to sort of coax him out of the cave.
Right. And
once I get him out, he kind of writes quite quickly. He very seldom wants to come back and sort of put the I's on and cross the T's. So if there are factual mistakes about certain lyrics, and there are many, I kind of don't go there because I don't think it's that important. I think if you've got the emotion and the story down, you may as well just let it flow.
Great. And you were talking about factual mistakes, and I know you brought this letter in today, which deals with sounds like a very, very serious fan of yours, but he just wants to get a couple of things straightened out. Have you got it on you?
I do have it here. Would you like to have a look at it?
I'd love to have a look at it. Chris, I have a real fondness for your lyrics. Some of them, a lot of them even, are excellent. It's a good start. I feel you have a true original viewpoint, but I have a problem with Up the Junction, which you may be able to iron out. The line, "This morning at 4:50, puts us squarely with the hero on the day of the birth of his child, but a couple of lines on, he maintains his child was walking less than a year later, which is impossible for anyone to know the day of birth. To carry this further, the guy then says, now she's 2 years older, which confuses the dateline even more. All this could have easily been resolved by writing one morning at 4:15. I have been a Squeeze fan since Argy Bargy, but as a writer, this bugs the hell out of me. Regards, Tony. Well, Tony really cares.
He cares,
yeah,
and he's right.
Yeah, brilliant. So we started off with Bob Dylan, Like a Rolling Stone. I know you've brought some Dylan lyrics in. What have you got?
Lily, Rosemary and the Jack of Hearts. When I was at school and I used to write poems on my books, on my school books, I was beaten over the head by sort of teachers that were 200 years old. And then one day this wonderful young English teacher took over, and he saw the poems and he thought there might be some legs in them, I guess. And he played me a Bob Dylan album. It wasn't this one, but it was the very first Bob Dylan album. And suddenly the idea of words being put to music became something very amazing to me. And then I started following people like David Bowie and thinking, oh, I could be like that, you know. And the other thing about this lyric to me is the rhythm of it. Sometimes when I'm writing, I can take a rhythm like this and put my own words in. And nobody knows. The festival was over, the boys were planning for a fall. The cabaret was quiet, except for the drilling in the wall. Isn't that a great detail there, I think? The curfew had been lifted and the gambling well shut down. Anyone with any sense had already left town. I think that's brilliant. He was standing in the doorway looking like the Jack of Hearts. I think that's genius.
And that's narrative, Dylan. He's a great storyteller, and you know there are sort of lots of ballad lyrics that he works with, and that's a great setup again. So he's setting us up there, and we're waiting to find out what happens next.
Yeah, I mean it's a song that you can close your eyes to and go off on a journey with him. He creates the film, the script, the characters. You just close your eyes and you're there.
Bob Dylan, of course, is considered to be one of the major influential artists of the 1960s.
Right.
And why do you think his influence was so great, bearing in mind that he starts off as a sort of Woody Guthrie acolyte and a folk singer with you wouldn't say generic, but it's not particularly a style which is singular, and then suddenly he grows into this character who is dominating the world from a lyrical perspective.
Well, there were people that I knew when I was growing up who were avid Dylan fans and would rise and fall by his every lyric. I wasn't one of those. However, he gave me the opportunity as a lyricist to be able to flare and to be able to expand stories and go on for verse after verse after verse. Of course, when you're working in the pop world, you know, verse after verse after verse doesn't work in a 3-minute song, which is impossible, you know.
Well, I think that's a very important area of lyricism, and I think if you have an abundance of material and almost an embarrassment of material, then you can compress these things down.
Yes.
Whereas if you have too little and you're trying to expand on a premise that isn't strong enough, then I think that's when a weak song always arrives. But I want to play you a track now, which is. I think it's a really interesting thing, and it happened a lot in the 60s. But I think its origins were possibly within the Dadaist movement, with the idea of random divination or random pairing of words, taking two disparate words, putting them together, creating lists of those words, and then just launching them with music to create novelty, or to create symbol which goes straight into the subconscious and creates some sort of sense of meaning.
Fantastic.
And I think the best example of that I can think of is the Beatles from Abbey Road, Come Together. You're listening to Lyrics By, with me, Murray Lachlan Young, with my guest, Chris Difford. Here come old Flat Top, he come grooving up slowly. He got juju eyeball. He won holy roller. He got hair down to his knees. Got to be a joker. He just do what he please. What do you make of that?
Well, I wish I'd written it.
So do I.
Yeah, I'd be living in St John's Wood.
So strung out.
So strung out, but yet so coherent.
Well, we had a friend of yours, Kae Tempest, in last week, and he was talking about creating a sense of place, and I think this creates an incredible sense of place, and wherever that place is, who knows? But it's somewhere kind of dark, sexy, weird, and out there.
Yeah. I can't. The trouble is, when I've been in that state of mind, and I've been in it quite a few times, I can't ever read what I've written.
So
it's gone.
Well, there's an interesting thing. You talk about the idea of pairing disparate words to create these images, which possibly has, its roots in Dadaist cut-up writing.
Yeah.
So I know you've brought a David Bowie track in, and there was a cut-up artist, a writer, and still managed to produce incredibly high-quality work.
Well, he did, but I wonder how much of that is a story that's just been exaggerated over time, because I think he was a very clever lyricist, even on the last album that he made. I don't think they were cut-up words. I think they were thoroughly thought through and sung with such depth and emotion. I don't think I've ever heard anything like that. But when you go back to David Bowie of old, when I first discovered it and I first saw him play in 1973, I think what I loved about his lyricism was the femininity within it. And it gave young men the opportunity to lean into that side of their life. There I was born and raised in the South London council estate, quite a masculine place, and then suddenly Bowie comes along and he opens up that femininity, which is a beautiful thing to have. I remember seeing him at Eltham College, and the walk home from there to where I lived, I think, took about an hour, and on that journey home I just said to myself, this is what I want to do.
Great.
I want to be like him.
So what have you got?
A letter to Hermione. This is the hand that wrote this letter sweeps the pillow clean. So rest your head and read a treasured dream. I care for no one else but you. I tear my soul to cease the pain. I think maybe you feel the same. What can we do? To me, that's the most ingenious opening line of any lyric that I've ever read. It's almost like when he wrote that lyric, it's almost as if it just had happened. It's like he got out of bed and he sat at his desk with a pencil and, the hand that wrote this letter sweeps the pillow clean. I'm sure that's kind of what he must have felt like, and that's probably what he did,
And what sort of time in his career did that lyric come from?
Well, that was not from the sort of Laughing Gnome period, a little bit after that. I think when he found himself.
You can't knock the Laughing Gnome as a structural piece.
Well, you can't. I mean, there's lots of great lyrics on that album. When you think that Donovan was sort of producing a similar kind of lyrical content around that time, it's kind of weird.
Well, absolutely, and I think you then have these ideas of people who have lyrical epiphanies, and you can see that with Cat Stevens, you can see it with Donovan, you can see it with Bowie, you can see it with lots of people that suddenly something clicks and they have found their own voice.
Yeah, but do you think that great lyricists, they have those moments and then it passes and then you're always looking back to that moment?
Well, I think there's this element of spilling that happens in youth where these words come rushing out. Remember, it's been building up through one's entire childhood and then it all comes out, and then if suddenly you attach fame to that, you attach media attention to that, and you attach possibly drugs and alcohol to that, then immediately those pathways are going to start to close down. And I think that it's about then understanding the technique of writing, and from what you're saying, the idea of this child self who writes from this pure place, to be able to keep the access to that one way or another, whichever way you manage to do it, seems to be the answer.
Yeah, and I think a lot of writers, they get to that stage and then it becomes a job, and then the voice that they found becomes a job, and then it loses its emotional touch, its emotional thread, which is a great shame, and I think maybe I've suffered that in the past, but now I really feel that, you know, at 63 years old, this has been my life. I am a lyricist, and I have to really take that on board, and the importance of that in my world is an incredible gift, you know. And writing with Glenn for 43 years now, I will be forever defined for that relationship and for the love that we both have for each other.
Fascinating stuff. The Rolling Stones there from 1969 and Midnight Rambler, with lyrics by Mick Jagger. When asked about that song a few years later, Keith Richards said, "A lot of people still complain they can't hear the voice properly. If the words come through, it's fine. If they don't, that's all right too. Because anyway, that can mean 1,000 different things to anybody. Did you hear about the Midnight Rambler? Well, honey, it's no rock and roll show. Well, I'm a-talking about the Midnight Gambler. Yeah, the one you never seen before." You're listening to Lyrics By with me, Murray Lachlan Young, and my guest is Squeeze lyricist and songwriter Chris Difford. So, we're talking about other people finding their voices. Do you recall a moment where you felt that you had found your own voice as a songwriter?
Very much so. I think around the Call for Cats, Argy Bargy time, those two albums are pretty much the same record, I think. And lyrically at that time, I think I was sparking off so many different things. And I think I'd found my voice, you know, with Up the Junction, to a lesser degree Call for Cats, although that was a bigger hit. But then there were lyrics that were brewing, that came out on the East Side Story album, when I really think that I'd reached the sort of, a sort of peak, if you like. And then, for one reason or another, drifted off into the wilderness that is whatever it is.
Self-involvement,
self-importance, or, you know, or decay. And really, I don't think it came back again until just recently. And I think Glenn and I have found a new way of working. It's a new relationship, and I think after all these years, it's quite a magical thing. It
sounds like gratitude's quite a big element.
Gratitude is the word. About. Yeah, I think there's a lot of fallow years, but the soil is still rich with vitamins, if you like. And I think if we plant the right crop, we'll come back with some great songs. And on the last album, I think we proved that if you can plant vitamins, I'm not quite sure that you can, but anyway,
you're a songwriter. You can say anything you like. Yeah. Are there any other tracks or lyrics that you would like to share?
I think that when you get older, it becomes more difficult to write about certain things. So you have to step up to the plate a bit and own your age.
Right.
And your audiences, luckily enough, grow at the same rate of knots as you. So you can start writing about the sort of things that they're going to feel. And I think Nick Lowe is brilliant at that. There's Hope for Us All, which is a Nick Lowe song. It's just a wonderful lyric, and I think he is the master of somebody who can speak to an audience that have grown up with him. He's not trying to speak to 19-year-old girls, you know, and I think that's the right thing to do as you get older. And on our last album, Cradle to the Grave, we wrote a song called Nirvana, which was about two people getting to their age where the kids had moved out, and they're just left with themselves, and they don't know what to do. They take the Mark Bolan posters down from the wall where the daughter once stayed, and then they're just sitting there looking at each other like the life has gone out of the home. And I haven't quite felt that myself yet, but I'm sure people that come to our gigs may well do.
And that's what I suppose you would call moving into a late style. There's lots of people, I think Van Morrison is a classic example, and the Rolling Stones recently have decided to, you know...
Yeah, and, you know, I think as a younger person, the younger lyricist that lives in the cave, he would have gone, oh, no, you shouldn't write about those kind of things, you're going to alienate your audience, but you don't, you clearly don't. I mean, they're growing up at the same rate, and, you know, I think that's what we're doing with our next album too, was kind of trying to keep it real for us, you know.
And doing what you want to do rather than what you think other people might want you to do. So not having other people's thoughts for them, having your own thoughts, owning your own desire to make music.
Yeah, I think so. And sometimes when you look into the audience, you can almost read what lyrics they would like. You kind of see their being, and you know what, you know, they've spent money on a babysitter. Yeah. They've come up on the train, they've had something to eat at Wagamama's or whatever, and they've come to see the gig. There are other restaurants, of course. They've come to the gig, and they've spent all that money to come and see you. They've got a contract with you to perform your hits, Pulling Muscles, Called for Cats Up the Junction.
Yes.
But you give them new stuff too, and they go home with a smile on their face. It works. It really works.
Okay, so why don't we listen to that Nick Lowe track?
Yeah, I've been rambling, sorry.
People are remarking on the change that's come over.
You're listening to Lyrics By, with me, Murray Lachlan Young, with my guest, Chris Difford. Well, we've spoken a lot about the old guys, and
me.
Yeah, but that's great.
The old spud.
Yeah. A new voice. Yes. In the world of lyrics in popular music. Is there anyone you particularly like the look of or sound of at the moment?
Well, it's taken a while for me to get to really admire Kae Tempest. She's such a powerhouse. I mean, she's got books coming out, plays coming out. You know, she's all over the place. But when I heard the last single on the radio, I was just completely blown away. She'd kind of sewn up all the emotions that seem to be going on in this crazy world that we live in a really brilliant way.
And fearless as well.
Fearless with it too. And she kind of delivers a song in the same way that Ian Dury would have done if he'd been alive, with a lot of emotion, not a lot of melody, but a lot of lyric. And for me, that's always key. You know, I don't think you need tons of melody to put a lyric across if you're going to be deep and sort of dig deep. And I think what she's done with this particular song is move so many different people in such a simple way. And she's from South London, so that can't be bad.
Perfect.
We came from the four corners. We are the raw waters, the course, the four horsemen. We drink from the...
So, listening to Kae Tempest there, who I suppose started off as a performance poet and has moved into becoming a pop artist.
Yes.
And then we've recently had, we go back to the beginning of the show with Bob Dylan. Yeah. And we've recently had him being given the Nobel laureateship for literature. Is there, and does it even matter whether there is a joining point, a point where a lyric becomes poetry, a point where a poem becomes a lyric? I mean, where does all that come together from your view?
It's a very interesting question. I think poetry is very different from lyricism. But I think if anybody manages to twist the two, it's definitely Dylan and probably Kate too. And what I'd really love to hear is possibly Kate on an acoustic guitar singing her songs, because I think so often the backing can alienate the ear. In Dylan's life, because he never made anything too complicated, you were always drawn to what he was going to say. But then he was talking to people in the 1960s through to the present day. Kate, obviously, with her music, is talking to younger people that are from the now. So she's probably coming at it from the right angle, I guess. So can you join the two up? I think we just have. And there are, this subject could go on for weeks because it's such a fascinating story. It really is. There's so many different lyricists we haven't touched on. But the great thing is that, when you sit in your car and you listen to the radio, it's only people that tell a story that are going to grab your ear.
Well, Chris, thanks so much for coming in today.
It's been an absolute pleasure.
Well, it's been a real pleasure to talk to you too. And we'll end with another track you've mentioned as being important lyrically. This is Ian Dury's Billericay Dickie. I had a love affair with Nina in the back of my Cortina. A seasoned-up hyena could not have been more obscena.
Had a love affair with Nina in the back of my Cortina.